everyone, and welcome to Make Romance Great podcast. In today's episode, we're going to delve into the fallacy of the dangerous romance novel. My name is Paulina, and I'm joined by my co host, Monica.
Hello, welcome everyone.
Do we need to give people any disclaimers before we start tearing this whole idea of the dangerous novel apart?
I may be swearing a lot.
That's nothing new.
That's nothing new. There may be mild spoilers, but probably we'll let you know before.
Potentially, and we also want to really urge anyone out there to not take our words out of context, because context really matters for a lot of the things that we will be talking about today.
But if you're a person that really likes to take someone's word out of context, feel free. If that's
Well,
what you want, I can't stop you.
if that will make you happy, I mean, power to you, I guess.
Yes. Are romance novels dangerous? No. The end.
I love how you always cut to the chase. Like, with that way, the podcast is 3 minutes and we're done.
Yes.
But to get back to the question, are romance novels dangerous? The idea of how they are dangerous has changed over time. Because it used to be, we're going back to around 70s and 80s and a little bit 90s, where it was the old, oh no, women have things that they get up to and that they enjoy and that's just for them and they make money out of that and gain financial independence. Horrible.
Yes, that's something we talked about in the second episode of the podcast. So the novels being treated dangerous, well, started from novels. And then this moved to moved to the romance novels, especially, and well, books for girls.
Absolutely. We'd like to believe that between episode 2 of this podcast and plain old common sense, we don't have to tell you why all of those ideas about why romance is dangerous do not apply to the year of our Lord 2025. But there are still new ideas on how our romance novel is dangerous, and that's evolved slightly.
Although the word dangerous is actually rarely used by the critics of romance, this is the thought I just got. So
Mm,
we would have the romance readers and romance fans that would say that others think romance novels are dangerous. So we would have, well, even the nonfiction positions like Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, which will still apply to danger. We would have the Dangerous Books for Girls by Maya Rodale. So it's either the how romance readers and romance writers see romance critiques thinking about romance, not them calling them dangerous per se.
yeah, I think your common man is more likely to say they're not appropriate for, or it's not something that people should be reading, or cause a whole bunch of moral panic about how this is all horrible and it's causing harm or it's toxic or whatever. Like that's the language that ordinary people tend to use, but it's still kind of harkening back to this idea that it's not good for you in one way or another.
Yes, and if something is not good for you, you would look at it as dangerous. It's not good for you. It may teach you inappropriate things. It would destroy your view to the world. It may, well, I don't know, help
Yeah,
you or make you be buried in the fiction and forget about the real world, etc., etc. And this kind of applies mostly to romance novels. I would say it's also a little bit for fantasy and for science fiction a little bit. This is at least what I was hearing when I was a teenager, when I was reading a lot of fantasy that, oh, but you know, it's not a real world. It's like, Mom, it's dragon novel. I know it's not real.
it's surprising how people are very quick to say, just use common sense. But then the moment something becomes popular, they forget to use common sense. Like, yes, duh, mom, I know that dragons aren't real. Like, duh, mom, I know that not every love story plays out in real life like this, and that people don't always behave like this, because I I have senses to experience the world with, and I can use my thinking. This novel idea called thinking. I have that.
Well, when you praise common sense a lot, you kind of may at some point forget that other people can use it as well. But I think the difference between what was thought and what was said about me reading fantasy, it's slightly different than what is said about women and girls reading romance novels altogether. So for reading fantasy, it was rather like if you would read too much, you will forget about reality, and it's still something you live in, and you can't live only in the worlds, in these fantastic worlds that you read about in the books. While if it comes to romance novel, it kind of, in the critic's minds, what you read in romance novel would translate into the real life, which
Yeah.
was never the case of sci-fi and fantasy. But somehow, for the common sense phrases, it would apply to the romance novel. Don't read this book, or like, well, you can read it, but I worry that these girls and young women will suddenly want to date brute men just because they read about them in the romance novels.
One way or another, both strands of logic are effectively saying, if you read these books, you will become stupid because these books are stupid. That's kind of what it boils down to. Like, whether it's the stupid that means you can't distinguish a world with dragons or without, or the kind of stupid that cannot see, red flags in a relationship because you've been brainwashed into treating them as desirable traits. And all of that criticism of the romance novels are dangerous kind of is effectively saying that if you read this, you will become stupid one way or another, as well as a whole host of individual bits, like the toxic masculinity being glorified, and at the same time women reading romance novels have much higher standards, and now men can't get a date and they're also single, and it's all your fault for reading romance novels. Poor them.
Well, somehow the romance novel became metaphor of being a woman. Whatever you do, it's just bad.
Absolutely. Insert that massive tangent from the Barbie movie. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that nowadays we're dealing with when people go, romance novels are dangerous, they're bad for you. And we are here to lay out before you why that logic is also bullshit.
So let's start with the thing that I had in my mind for the last at least few days, if not a fortnight or something. At some point, I started to think, why on earth people would expect that romance owe anyone any education. That's one of the first thing that I would want to talk about. And I have no questions, surprisingly, this time. As the master of the very short answer, yes, no, the end of podcast. Here I have absolutely no idea. Well, maybe there is this one of the female role that society will throw on women, that education is on their side and they need to teach others stuff. And at some point, the educational or like female related societal roles were also a little bit thrown to the queers. It also would work a little bit in romance, but altogether, why do you think that romance owe you any kind of education, and why romance owe anyone any education? And I would mention here, especially if we talk about simply romance novel, not young adult, because young adult is kind of different, right? It's
Hmm.
supposed to give you something. show you the way one way or another, but that's the point of young adults. So the young person journey of becoming or on their way to becoming an adult. But if we talk about regular adult romance novel, why do you think they should educate you or anyone
I think
else if it comes to that?
I think that extends to any fiction other than, like as we said, like children's literature and young adults, which do kind of have to teach you something at least about morality and life in broadly speaking. But if I want to learn, I don't know, if I want to learn to cook, I'm not looking for that in a fiction novel. I'm going for a cookbook. So yeah, if you want to learn something, fiction isn't and should not be your first point of call. So therefore, to expect that a romance novel, yes, it's about relationships, and yes, there might be something to pick up on an individual personal basis, but that's not the intention of the book, and it's not the responsibility of the author to teach you stuff. Part of me does wonder whether at least some of that expectation is coming from, let's say, like the 50s and 60s, where Harlequin as a publisher was growing. And because, yes, like you still had women's magazines that would touch on relationships and health subjects, Harlequin novels probably became a little bit of an outlet for women to share experiences, especially sexual experiences, and talk about them more freely. And people may have learned something from that. But even then, that wasn't the point of those books. And it wasn't the role of those authors to teach those women about sex and about consent or whatever. It was always, here's a novel, it's fictional, enjoy. But yeah, if anyone out there has an answer on why should romance be treated as if it has to educate people on everything to do with love, relationships, and sex, have at it. Pop off in our comments. We'd love to hear your takes because we're coming up short here.
So if it comes to this educational things, obviously there will be, as you said, a lot of things like, oh, because girls will now want to date prudes and will not take care of the red flags if they see them in the partner because of reasons. I don't know, because they may think that it will be romantic or they may change and so on. It's like, first of all, please stop talking about women as they are fucking delusional. Because we can be delusional without romance novel. I assure you.
Oh, I know, yeah. Like the
Absolutely.
term Delulu did not come from nothing.
Oh yes, absolutely. And it's not invented by romance novels, I suppose. But like, well, first thing is stuff that we can find in the novels. Second, I'm really annoyed sometimes by comments about specific books. So I'm not giving like examples who said what because that's not the point. I'm just trying to give the common thing, the common way of thinking about the romance. I once seen on Instagram a girl who was talking about the romance novel she just read, and she kinda liked it, but her comment was, I would really like this book much more if it would have been queer romance. And I'm like, what the
Okay.
fuck? If you want to read queer romance, why are you reading cis hetero romance and then
Yeah.
complaining is not queer? I mean, like, where is the point?
Yeah.
Well, now we have quite a lot queer romances. Obviously,
Hmm.
we would have much more, well, straight romance. It's still mainly straight man, woman type of literature, but we do have more and more diverse books, which is fantastic. And
Hmm.
yet you go into straight romance and then you are like, oh, this book would have been much better and gave much more educational content if it was queer. It's like, but it's not. Get over it. Find yourself a queer romance.
Yeah.
That's fine.
It's not that hard. Like there's
Absolutely
tons of them.
not anymore. Not anymore.
No.
And the second thing, which are these are ridiculous things. So, the book by Kimberly Lemming, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. I
Yes.
think it's going to be published in Poland this year,
Oh,
if I'm not
interesting.
mistaken. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't find now any information about it, but I really heard about it somewhere last year, I think, that it's going to
Hmm.
be translated and published in Poland. So one of the girls that was announcing that on Instagram, she mentioned something like, well, this was initially self-pub and whatever, and
Hmm.
started to be really, really popular among romantasy readers. And she mentioned something that it really sucks that the title romanticizes alcohol. And I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You are like, I really like watching this person. And what she said is like, it romanticizes drinking alcohol. And I'm like, do you really think, like, just sit straight for a second and think, do you really think that any girl would think, well, now me and my girls are going to have a drink because maybe, just maybe, if we get drunk enough, there will be sexy demon to appear somewhere in the pub. This is idiotic. This is ridiculous.
Sorry, I'm still processing that insane take because the reason I've read this book and I genuinely love it. I've read the second one. I just bought the third one and I'm going to read it as soon as I get a chance. But the reason I picked it up was because the title is so hilarious. It's immediately obvious from that title that it's meant as a joke. It's trying to throw very contemporary, slang and how people talk nowadays onto a fantasy setting. And I'd say quite a lot of that book is very much in this spirit. Like the title gives you a great idea of what to expect from the book in terms of how it's written, what kinds of ideas are going to be prevalent there, all this. To say from the title alone that it glorifies alcohol and alcohol use is, you could say that about anything. You could literally say that about any time someone goes, oh, yeah, I ate too much today. Well, that glorifies gluttony and, overeating and promotes unhealthy eating habits. Just listen to yourself for a second. Please. It's not that hard and
Well,
it's not that deep.
it's not that deep, but there are people. I would say they are not in majority, but there would definitely be people who would say that, well, I got, I don't know, flashbacks because the girl was saying she was eating too much and I had eating disorders, and there was no trigger warning about that at the beginning of the book. And I'm like, oh, come on, stop it.
And
Stop
books
it.
generally have gotten better with including trigger warnings. There's no way one author could potentially include every single tiny thing that could set someone off, but they are doing a great job at including the big ones. And especially, I think, with Kimberly Lemmings, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved the Demon, if alcohol is your trigger, then you don't even need to open the book. You have the title there and it tells you, oh, there's going to be mention of alcohol. It's kind of crucial to how the plot starts. Maybe that's not for me. And you move on because it's immediately there. This is your trigger warning. But anyway, I feel like we've strayed a little bit. But
Not a
yeah, it's
little, but still.
but again, no one is deconstructing titles of books of any other genres to that extent as they do with romance novels. Romance novels are scrutinized to a degree that no other genre is for no reason in particular, because people at the same time will go, oh, this is just silly stuff. And at the same time, forget that it's not that deep and decide, no, 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 if you're not educating your readers about consent, safe sex, safe, substance use, everything that you possibly could think of, then you were a horrible writer. Just, this is not a textbook. This is fiction. It's telling you a story of people and their romantic relationship. There's no room
That's
for
it.
education there. Yeah.
That's it. I think we should change the name of the podcast or just add the subtitle Make Romance Great. It's not that
It's
deep.
not that deep.
You read my mind. I love you.
This is why we're doing this.
Yes.
I guess sort of to carry on with the various arguments. Like, yes, on the one hand, romance as a genre is doing quite a lot of good in terms of making stuff that used to seem unsexy appealing and attractive and sexy, because I am reading romances where consent is established very verbally, very clearly, so that now you can try that yourself, but it's in the context still of this particular couple or this particular relationship. It isn't the job of the authors to for all of them to do that, because it's not always going to be how that particular story develops. And again, it's not on the author. And the one bit, as much as we like to dunk on our common enemy, Linda Barlow from Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, because that woman has some wild takes as well. But even she, in one of her essays, that was describing and talking about the hero, and specifically talking about the aggressive man, the brutal man, the alpha male, if you want to call it that.
And
Yeah,
that every reader wants to read about this particular type of man, obviously. Because we cannot
yeah.
be diverse and we cannot like any other man, just the brute rake, whatever.
I think that part is probably just telling of her time, but also
Yeah.
I have my own theories on what happened with Linda Barlow afterwards. But even she, in that one essay, then said, hang on, let me pull it up. Is this really the sort of man most women want? Of course not. And she goes to say, like, my husband is absolutely not like the men that I write about. He's almost the exact opposite. And that is the reason why I married him. Because guess what? Readers know that this is fiction, and they know that what's exciting in fiction doesn't always translate to exciting and good and stable and desirable in real life. So have we really not evolved from the 1990s when Linda Barlow wrote that essay? Like, have are we still in that mindset of, oh no, like if you read romance, then you're going to fall victim to this idea that it's only the alpha men that you should desire and all this. Like, we've evolved quite a lot since then.
Especially since the social media times. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Everybody has a chance to listen to women, and it's still in real life, it turns out to be men still praising the alpha man and do this and that to get a woman. And somehow, all of the men who say that and the man who tends to listen to these alpha bros, they have troubles with finding themselves a partner.
What a surprise.
What a surprise! And somehow these bros would rather listen to other bros talking about how to get a woman rather than listen to women saying like, "Hey, we don't want this, but we want this and this and this and that." By the way, doesn't I don't know, like all of these bros listening to dating advice, alpha guys, doesn't that make the all of the listeners better?
Please apply water to burnt area.
I'm sorry, this is what I just. Oh,
No, don't be sorry. Own
oh, I'm
that.
not sorry. Absolutely, I'm just trying to be polite.
Nah, fuck that.
I'm speaking English. When I speak English, I kind of try to speak more politely, even if I swear every second word.
We are fucking polite on this podcast, all right?
Absolutely.
Whilst on the topic of all of those alpha men and beta men and all of those who follow that rhetoric, a lot of people who would immediately go, romance novels are promoting toxic relationships and toxic masculinity. Men, toxic men and abusive men do not need romance novels in order to perpetuate harm. If anything is an indicator, look at how much of what is therapy language have seeped into real life usage. Terms like love bombing, gaslighting. catfishing, just the three most common ones that anyone who's ever used a dating app will be familiar with. Those are behaviors that romance novels don't typically glorify. There's always a bad seed, there's always a bad example somewhere, but on the whole, in my experience of reading romance, those aren't the kinds of behaviors that are being promoted. If you want to use Mr. Darcy as like the original bad boy, broody man, he's doing none of those things. He's certainly not gaslighting Elizabeth. He tells her point blank, like, you're not that pretty, but maybe I'll marry you, at least the first time. He's not love bombing her, for sure. He's not catfishing her, like, and yet
Well,
men,
he kind of is love bombing her just in his own way, which turns out not to be love bombing at all.
yeah. But as you just said, like, it's kind of not really that. It's not what we understand love bombing
Yeah,
to
kind
be.
of is the
Yeah,
main
like
point.
what we're saying is romance novels aren't inherently making readers blind to predators and abusers and toxic people because that's not the kinds of stuff that's glorified. And those people who want to harm, they already know that times have changed enough that they can't go with this macho alpha man brute force. And they found other more sneaky ways to carry on being shitty people without romance novels helping them or without relying on them, because obviously they're too manly to ever touch such a thing as a romance novel. So why would they even know what's inside of one? The other way in which people still say that, romance novels are dangerous, they're promoting bad stuff, can be negated with the whole argument of one bad example doesn't mean everything. And I'm stopping myself because my notes originally had a very blunt example. So I'll just go for it and safety be damned. If we can all agree that not every R&B musician is a pedo just because R. Kelly is, then why are we having this massive moral panic that romance is glorifying abuse and toxic relationships because one author is? In this case, yes, I'm giving a side eye to Colleen Hoover. She is just one author out of hundreds of romance and romantic novelists out there. And most of them certainly are not glorifying abusive relationships. Not most of them, a lot of them actually point blank state, here's the heroine. She's escaped an abusive relationship. Here's someone who was in an abusive relationship and they're healing from this through this one that is good.
Are you telling the critics and academics to actually judge the genre by the best books, not the worst? How dare you?
It's as if I had heard this quote by Nancy Pearl that said, literary fiction is always judged by the best examples of it, and romance is judged by the worst. And I'm saying no more to this. And the last argument that I'd like to throw into the ring as to why people calling romance dangerous is a whole load of bullshit is kind of a flip side to that. Like we've agreed that romance is inherently escapist. It's fiction, it's not that deep. Great. Fiction, especially escapist fiction, can be a force of good. We've already said, like, some romance does promote like ideas that we now value, like encouraging people to use language of consent. We're being shown healthy relationships, we're being shown people have agency in their relationships. There's also something to be said that, especially for marginalized groups, it's not just about resistance and demonstrations and protest, it's also about joy and celebration. So the fact that we have pretty easily accessible queer romance, that we have pretty easily accessible romance written by people of color, that any one of us can pick up and read and get that perspective, as well as those authors sharing experiences from their communities and uplifting their communities. That's only dangerous to racists and homophobes. And we don't care that is dangerous to them.
So altogether, would I want to say that the romance critiques are, well, still the homophobes and fascists and misogynistic people. Well, no, because especially if it comes to, I think there is this moral panic. Is this moral panic? Duh. But this moral panic around romance, it also concerns people that really they don't want to say anything bad altogether. They poor people. They have loads of very good points about stuff altogether. Let's not get into like talking about very exact people because we are not.
Mhm.
But I think that everyone should cool their head a little bit if it comes to romance novels because
Again, make
people,
romance great. It's not
I,
that deep.
yeah, the end of podcast. Thank you guys.
No, not the end of podcast, but like, yeah, there's you always have extremes. There's people with
You do.
extreme views who will cause a moral panic about anything. A lot of the ones who are perpetuating this myth that reading romance novels is dangerous for all of these reasons, they're either ordinary people who haven't tried romance because they're scared of it, because they think it's a dangerous thing, or it's coming from places where, yes, romance could be better, not necessarily as a genre, but in terms of the treatment of romance would improve experience of it. And what I mean by that is not every romance novel that's been published is categorized and shelved openly enough. So you will go to a bookshop and you'll pick up a book and you think, huh, I think I could give this to my child. And unless you're in the know of what romance novels look like now, yes, you probably are giving explicit content to someone who's a bit too young for it. But some of that is because people aren't putting those books under romance, 18 plus, whatever you want to call it. And some of it is because people just assume that all of it is the same stuff.
So we actually shouldn't bash the romance writers or romance reader if it comes to that, or the novels themselves, but the publishers for choosing this type of covers, and second, booksellers who really, really, really don't want to make book racks in their shops saying romance. They would put it as contemporary fiction, they would put it as a women's fiction, whatever the hell it means. They will put it
And
as
sometimes young adult.
and sometimes young adult as well, because it has this cutesy cover, so it must be young adult. Well, it is not. Or they know what this book is, but still they don't care because teenagers and young women, they read a lot.
I think there's also, we need to demand from publishers and distributors that books are labeled correctly. There's a big notion within the Romantic Novelist Association that if you are being published, please pressure your publisher that your book is counted as romance and sagas as it's labeled in the UK, not general fiction, not young adult if that's not what it is. Be explicit because if the publisher's clear on this is this genre, then people working in bookshops will have an easier time of where to put it. People working in libraries will have an easier time of where to shelve that particular book. And then it's not going to accidentally land with someone who's not the intended audience and, yeah, potentially scar someone by very graphic descriptions of members.
It took me a second.
I'm glad you got there.
Thank you.
In other words, we are saying stop blaming the individual people, i.e., readers and writers, and it's all down to the systems of power.
Absolutely. Social feminism, not liberal one. Anyways, one more thing I wanted to say here is we are not saying that every book that we can mention here or talk all together about that they are good books. We are not saying that romance cannot be criticized. We are not saying that particular books cannot be criticized because of reasons, because they're romance, etc. So we are not trying to turn the notion around from the romance novels being overly criticized to not criticize them at all. This is very childish, and we are not doing this at all. You can criticize them as much as you criticize any other book, but what I want to say, what we want to say in this episode, in this particular episode, is please do not criticize it more than you criticize any other genre. Because somehow the crime novels, crime fiction is not being criticized for promoting murder. And somehow romance novels are being criticized for toxic relationship or anyhow. Women are not stupid, believe me. Well, we can be stupid, but men can be stupid as well. Please do not take away the stupidity from us. We want to be stupid sometimes. But people who read, they would normally know what they are reading. So it would be the same notion as blaming computer games for aggressive teenagers, which was proved it's pretty much not the case. It's the same criticizing women for getting in bad relationships because they are reading novels. I would say this is quite the opposite. So
And it's,
if the book is
yeah.
bad, feel free to criticize it because we read a lot of romance and we read a lot of very badly written romance. But the critique saying this person shouldn't behave like this because it's toxic, and this woman shouldn't get into relationship with this guy because it's toxic, and these two guys are not fit to be together because of reasons. This is not the critique that we are giving here. If it's written the way that it makes no sense, that there is no logic in this relationship because there is no chemistry, there was no relationship, and out of nowhere we would have insta love just because. Feel free to criticize it, absolutely. But like demanding from the book to educate girls, gays, men, anyone about how relationships should look like, if you should drink or not, if you should use substances or not, about consent, etc., etc. This is ridiculous. Use your common sense, that you would like to say.
I hope everyone imagines that Meryl Streep gift from the Oscars. Standing ovation. Demand better written books and demand better education so that people can employ their critical thinking when reading and
Yeah,
apply it to
yeah.
everything and not just instantly go, "Uh, this book bad because it talks sex." Okay.
Yeah, gay sex as well.
You can't say that. That's not something that, the conservatives know about. Keep it secret.
Conservatives can go and fuck themselves.
They would like to, but they're too repressed.
Oh,
And also no one wants to fuck them.
and be, because of the woke
Yeah,
forbids them to
obviously.
fuck themselves.
Because
Well,
women have read romance novels and now they have high standards and they don't want to fuck the conservatives.
damn it, romance writers.
How dare you? And on that note, thank you everyone who's tuned in and listened to our hot takes and telling you about all that bullshit that goes into this fallacy of the dangerous romance novel. We hope that you enjoyed yourself. You can listen to this podcast on a whole bunch of different streaming platforms, and we aim to publish a new episode every other week. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back and we'll talk about something else that will tell us how to make romance great. Not again, because we're not there yet.
Make
See you next
romance
time.
great. It's not that deep.
Make romance great. It's not that deep.
See you next
Bye.
time. Bye.